In this video we're going to be looking at a WJEC history question which asks you how useful a source is. You're told to use the source and your own knowledge to answer the question, which is worth 6 marks. The question asks how useful a source is to a historian studying the popularity of cinema in the 1930s. You were told to answer the question using the source and your own knowledge. Let's look at the mark scheme to help us answer this question. The answer is marked in levels. There are 3 of them. Level 1, which is worth 1 or 2 marks, is given if you just copy something from the source. Level 2, which is worth 4 marks, is given if you say how useful the source is and explain who the source came from and when it was written. Level 3, which is worth 5 to 6 marks, is given when you say how useful the source is, mention what the source says, talk about who said it and when, and finish with what the purpose of the source was. Let's take a look at how we can answer this question. To get high marks, you need to say in your first sentence how useful the source is. Next, you need to think about what the source says, or what's in the source. This is known as content. Then you need to say who said the source and when it was written or said or spoken. This is known as origin. And then why it was spoken or written. This is known as purpose. The way to remember this is to think COP. C-O-P. Where C stands for content, O stands for origin, and P stands for purpose. With COP, it doesn't matter which letter you start with. You could start with the C, which stands for content, or the O, which stands for origin. I'm going to start with origin. The origin of a source is where it comes from and when it was written or spoken, and you'll find that below the source. In this particular case, the source was spoken by Hilda Richards, who lived in Milford Haven and remembers how much fun it was going to the cinema in 1934. This is primary evidence because Hilda was there and is giving a first-hand account. During the 1930s, the Depression caused much unemployment and suffering in Britain, and going to the cinema was a chance to forget about people's worries. Next, I'm going to think about the content. In the source, Hilda says that an important reason why young people went to the cinema was not to watch the film, but to meet boys and girls and to get a date. Finally, let's think about purpose, or why the source was spoken or written. The writing under the source tells us that Hilda was interviewed by members of a school history group in 1992. It's likely that what she says is correct, because it was well known at the time that the cinema was a popular way for young people to date and to get dates. Not everyone would have gone to the cinema for this reason, but for many this was good enough. Now let's look at an example answer. In order to get high marks for this type of question, you have to remember COP, content, origin, and purpose. My first sentence says that the source is useful. And why it's useful? I'm using the word because. The reason it's useful is to do with the O in COP, origin. It comes from a lady who visited cinema in the 1930s. The next sentence brings in knowledge of the context. That means what was going on at the time. And in the 1930s, Britain was going through the Depression, and cinemas, or dream palaces, as they were called, were a chance for people to forget about their worries for a few hours. The next part of the answer is to do with the C in COP. C stands for content, and this part is taken from the source itself and what Mrs. Richards remembers about going to the cinema in the 1930s. The final part of the answer is to do with the P in COP, which is purpose. Purpose is about the reason why a source was spoken or written. In this case, Mrs. Richards was being interviewed by a school history group in 1992, and what she has to say about the cinema is likely to be correct, because it was known at the time that cinemas were popular with young people for going on dates and for dating people. Although Mrs. Richards' comments are useful, historians would also know that they are the remembrances or the memories of just one lady, and that they may not represent what it would have been like for everyone everywhere. Use this video now to help you try an example question of your own.